The Scholars Chair presents a collection of essays by Objectivist philosopher Ayn Rand. The essays were compiled by renowned scholar, author, and educator Leonard Beckhoff in his book, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. Chapter 1, Reality. Philosophy is not useless to the intellect, but a power from which no man can abstain. Anyone can say that he suspends with a view of reality, knowledge, the good, and no one can implement this credo. The reason is that man, by his nature as a conceptual being, cannot function at all without some form of philosophy to serve as his guide. Ayn Rand discusses the role of philosophy in her West Point lecture, Philosophy, Who Needs It? Without abstract ideas, she says. You will not be able to deal with concrete, particular, real-life problems. You would be in the position of a newborn infant to whom every object is a unique, unprecedented phenomenon. The difference between his mental state and yours lie in the number of conceptual integrations your mind has performed. You have no choice but the necessity to integrate your observations, your experiences, your knowledge into abstract ideas, i.e., into principles. What integrates them? Philosophy. A philosophic system is an integrated view of existence. As a human being, you have no choice about the fact that you need a philosophy. Your only choice is whether you define your philosophy by a conscious, rational, disciplined process of thought and hard logical deliberation, or let your subconscious accumulate a junk heap of unwarranted conclusions, forced generalizations, undefined contradictions, undigested slogans, unidentified wishes, doubts, and fears thrown together by chance, but integrated by your subconscious into a kind of mongrel philosophy and focused into a single solid weight self-doubt like a ball and chain, in the place where your mind's wings should have grown. Philosophy, in Ayn Rand's view, is the fundamental force shaping every man and culture. It is the science that guides man's conceptual faculty, and thus every field of endeavor that counts on this faculty. Deepest issues of philosophy are the deepest roots of man's thoughts, their actions, their history, and therefore their triumphs, their disasters, their future. Philosophy is a human need, as real as the need for food. It is a need of the mind, without which man cannot obtain his food or anything else his life requires. To satisfy this need, one must realize that philosophy is a system of ideas. By its very nature, as an integrating science, it cannot be a grab bag of isolated issues. All philosophic questions are integrated. One may not, therefore, raise any such questions at random without a requisite context. If one tries the random approach, then questions which one has no means of answering simply proliferate in all directions. Suppose, for example, that you read an article by Ayn Rand and glean from it only one general idea, with which you decide you agree. Man should be selfish. How, you must soon ask, is the generality to be applied to concrete situations? What is selfishness? Does it mean doing whatever you feel like doing? What if your feeling is irrational? But who is to say what's rational or irrational? And who is Ayn Rand to say what a man should do anyway? Maybe what's true for her isn't true for you, and what's true in theory isn't true in practice. What is the truth? Can it vary from one person or realm to another? And come to think of it, aren't we all bound together? Can anyone ever really achieve private goals in this world? If not, there's no point of being selfish. What kind of world is it? And if people followed Ayn Rand, wouldn't that lead to monopolize and cutthroat competition, as the socialists say? And how does anyone know the answer to all these and any similar questions? What method of knowledge would a man use? And how does one know that? For a philosophic idea to function properly as a guide, one must know the full system to which it belongs. An idea plucked from the middle is of no value, cannot be validated, and will not work. One must know that idea's relationship to all other ideas that give it context, definition, application, proof. One must know all this not as a theoretical end in itself, but for practical purposes. One must know it to be able to rely on an idea to make rational use of it and ultimately to live. In order to approach philosophy systematically, one must begin with its basic branches. Philosophy, according to Objectivism, consists of 5 branches. The 2 basic ones are metaphysics and epistemology. Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that studies the nature of the universe as a whole. Epistemology is the study of the nature and means of human knowledge. These 2 branches make possible a view of the nature of man. Here are 3 evaluative branches of philosophy. Ethics, the broadest of these, provide a core of values to guide human choices and actions. Politics studies the nature of a social system and defines the proper functions of government. Aesthetics studies the nature of art and defines the standard by which an artwork should be judged. Every philosophy builds on its starting points. Where, then, does one start? What ideas qualify as primaries? By the time men begin to philosophize, they are adults who have acquired a complex set of concepts. The first task of a philosopher is to separate the fundamentals from the rest. He must determine which concepts are at the base of human knowledge and which are further up the structure, which are the irreducible principles of cognition and which are derivatives. Objectivism begins by naming and validating its primaries. Ayn Rand does not select questions at random. She does not plunge in by caprice. She begins deliberately at the beginning, at what she can prove is the beginning and the root of all the rest. Existence, consciousness, and identity as the basic axioms. We begin as philosophers where we began as babies, at the only place there is to begin, by looking at the world. As philosophers, however, we know enough to state, as we look at anything, it is. We start with the irreducible fact and concept of existence, that which is. The first thing to say about that which is simply, it is. As Greek philosophers formulated the principle, what is, or in Ayn Rand's word, Existence exists. This axiom must be the foundation of everything else. Before one can consider any other issue, before one can ask what things there are, or what problems men face in learning about them, before one can discuss what one knows or how one knows it, first there must be something, and one must grasp that there is. If not, there is nothing to consider or to know. The concept of existence is the widest of all concepts. It subsumes everything, every entity, actions, attribute, relationship, including every state of consciousness, everything which is, was, or will be. The concept does not specify that a physical world exists. As the first concept at the base of knowledge, it covers only what is known implicitly, if not explicitly, by the gamut of human race, from the newborn baby or the lowest savage on through the greatest scientist and most erudite sage. All of these know equally the fundamental fact that there is something, something as against nothing. You, the audience, have now grasped the first axiom of philosophy. This act implies a second axiom, that you exist possessing consciousness, consciousness being the faculty of perceiving that which exists. Consciousness is not inherent in the fact that existence as such, a world without conscious organisms is possible, but consciousness is inherent in your grasp of existence, inherent in saying there is something of which I am aware. There is something of which I am aware. The fact of consciousness is also a fundamental starting point, even if biologists or physicists were someday to find us a scientific analysis of the conditions of consciousness in terms of physical structure or energy quanta or something now unknown. This would not alter the fact that consciousness is an axiom. Before one can raise any questions pertaining to knowledge, whether of content or of method, including the question of conditions of consciousness, one must first be conscious of something and recognize that one is. All questions presuppose that one has the faculty of knowledge, the attribute of consciousness. One ignorant of this attribute must perforce be ignorant of the whole field of cognition and philosophy. Consciousness, to repeat, is the faculty of perceiving that which exists. Perceiving is used here in the widest sense, equivalent to being aware of. To be conscious is to be conscious of something. Here is Ayn Rand's critical passage in regard to this idea. Existence exists, she says. In the act of grabbing, the statement implies two corollary axioms: that everything exists which one perceives, and that one exists possessing consciousness, consciousness being the faculty of perceiving that which exists. If nothing exists, there can be no consciousness. A consciousness with nothing to be conscious of is a contradiction in terms. A consciousness conscious of nothing but itself is a contradiction in terms. Before it could identify itself as consciousness, it had to be conscious of something. If that which you claim to perceive does not exist, what you possess is not consciousness. Whatever the degree of your knowledge, these two, existence and consciousness, are axioms you cannot escape. These two are the irreducible primaries implied in any action you undertake, in any part of your knowledge, and in its sum. For the first ray of light you perceive at the start of your life to the widest erudition you might acquire at its end. Whether you know the shape of a pebble or the structure of the solar system, the axioms remain the same, that it exists and that you know it. A third and final basic axiom is implicit in the first two. It is the law of identity. To be is to be something, to have a nature, to possess identity. A thing is itself, or in the traditional formula, A is A. The identity of an existence means that which it is, the sum of its attributes or characteristics. Whatever you choose to consider, be it an object, an attribute, or an action, the law of identity remains the same, writes Ayn Rand. A leaf cannot be a stone at the same time. It cannot be all red or all green at the same time. It cannot freeze and burn at the same time. A is A. Or, if you wish, it stated in simpler language, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. Ayn Rand offers a new formulation of this axiom. Existence is identity. She does not say existence has identity, which might suggest that identity is a feature separable from existence, as a coat of paint is separable from the house that has it. The point is that to be is to be something. Existence and identity are indivisible, either implies the other. In some things exist, then something exists. And if there is a something, then there is a something. The fundamental fact cannot be broken in two. Why? One may ask. Use two concepts to identify one fact. This procedure is common in philosophy and in other fields as well. When men have several perspectives on a single fact, then they consider it from different aspects or in different contexts. It is often essential to form concepts that identify the various perspectives. Existence differentiates a thing from nothing, from the absence of a thing. This is the primary identification on which all things depend. It is the recognition, in conceptual terms, that the thing is. Identity indicates not that it is, but that it is. This differentiates one thing from another, which is a distinguishable step in cognition. The perspective here is not it is versus it is not, but it is this versus it is that. Thus, the context and purpose of the two concepts differ, although the fact both concepts name is indivisible. Like existence and consciousness, identity is also a fundamental starting point of knowledge. Before one can ask what any existent is, it must be something, and one must know this. If not, then there is nothing to investigate or to exist. Inherent in a man's grasp of any object is the recognition, in any form, that there is something I am aware of. There is existence, something, identity. I am aware of consciousness. These three are the basic axiomatic concepts recognized by the philosophy of objectivism. An axiomatic concept, writes Ayn Rand, is the identification of the primary fact of reality, which cannot be analyzed, reduced to other facts, or broken into component parts. It is implicit in all facts and in all knowledge. It is the fundamentally given and directly perceived or experienced, which requires no proof or explanation, on which all proofs and explanations rest. Dr. Beckhoff writes, axiomatic concepts are not subject to the process of definition. Their references can be specified only ostensibly by pointing to instances. Everything to be grasped about these facts is implicit in any act or adult cognition. Indeed, it is implicit much earlier. After the first discriminated sensation or perception, Miss Ryan observes, man's subsequent knowledge adds nothing to the basic facts designated by the term existence, identity, consciousness. Subsequent knowledge makes the explicit conceptual identification of these facts possible. But the facts themselves, which are the data and the constituents later to be integrated into the concepts, are present to and from the first such awareness. It is this sense that a knowledge of axioms is implicit from the beginning. It is this implicit knowledge, which Ayn Rand wrote, that permits man's consciousness to develop further. Being implicit from the beginning, existence, consciousness, and identity are outside the province of proof. Proof is the derivation of a conclusion from antecedent knowledge, and nothing is antecedent to axioms. Axioms are the starting points of cognition on which all proofs depend. One knows that the axioms are true not by inference of any kind, but by sense perception. When one perceives a tomato, for example, there is no evidence that it exists, beyond the fact that one perceives it. There is no evidence that it is something, beyond the fact that one perceives it. And there is no other evidence that one is aware, beyond the fact that one is perceiving it. Axioms are perceptual self-evidences. There is nothing to be said in their behalf except look at reality. What is true of tomatoes implies equally to oranges, buildings, people, music, and stars. What philosophy does is to give an abstract statement of such self-evident facts. Philosophy states these facts as universal or in universal form. Whatever exists, exists. Whatever exists is what it is. In whatever form one is aware, one is aware. The previous statement is the validation of the objectivist axioms. Validation, I take, is to be a broader term than proof. One is subsumes any process of establishing an idea's relationship to reality, whether deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, or perceptual self-evident. In this sense, one can and must validate every term of knowledge, including axioms. The validation of axioms, however, is the simplest of all, sense perception. The fact of axioms are available to perception does not mean that all human beings accept or even grasp axioms in conscious conceptual terms. Vast number of men, such as primitives, never progress beyond implicit knowledge of the axioms. Lacking explicit philosophic identification of this knowledge, they have no way to adhere to the axioms consistently and typically fall into some form of contradicting self-evident as in the various magical worldviews, such as implicitly deny the law of identity. Such men stunt their minds by subjecting themselves to an undeclared epistemological civil war. The war pits their professed outlook on the world against the implicit knowledge of which they are actually counting in order to survive. Even lower are men of an advanced civilization who, thanks to the work of a genius such as Aristotle, know the explicit identification of axioms, then consciously reject them. A declared inner war, deliberate, systematic, self-contradiction is the essence of the intellectual life of such individuals. Examples include philosophers of the past 2 centuries who reject the very idea of self-evident as the base of knowledge, and who then repudiate all 3 basic axioms, attacking them as arbitrary postulates, linguistic conventions, or Western prejudice. Dr. Peikoff have written, "The 3 axioms I have been discussing have a built-in protection against all attacks. They must be used and accepted by everyone, including those who attack them and those who attack the concept of the self-evident." Let me illustrate this point by considering a typical charge leveled by opponents of philosophic axioms. People disagree about axioms. We often hear, "What is self-evident to one may not be self-evident to another." How can a man know that his axioms are objectively true? How can he ever be sure that he's right? This argument starts by accepting the concept of disagreement, which it uses to challenge the objectivity of any axioms, including existence, consciousness, and identity. The opponents of these axioms pose as defenders of truth, but it is only a pose. Their attack on the self-evident amount to the charge. Your belief is an idea doesn't necessarily make it true. You must prove it, because facts are what they are, independent of your beliefs. Every element of this charge relies on the very axioms that these people are questioning and supposedly setting aside. I quote Ayn Rand, "You can't prove that you exist or that you aren't conscious." They scatter, blanketing out the fact that proof presupposes existence, consciousness, and a complex chain of knowledge, the existence of something to know, of the conscious able to know, and of the knowledge that has learned to distinguish between such concepts as the proved and the unproved. When a savage who has not learned to speak declares existence must be proved, he is asking you to prove it by means of non-existence. When he declares that your consciousness must be proved, he is asking you to prove it by means of unconsciousness. He is asking you to step into a void outside of existence and consciousness to give him proof of both. He is asking you to become a zero, gaining knowledge about a zero. When he declares that an axiom is a matter of arbitrary choice and he doesn't choose to accept the axiom that exists, he blanks out the fact that he has accepted it by uttering the sentence that the only way to reject it is to shut one's mouth, expound no theories, and die. An axiom is a statement that identifies the base of knowledge and of any further statement pertaining to that knowledge, a statement necessarily contained in all others, whether any particular speaker chooses to identify it or not. An axiom is a proposition that defeats its opponent by the fact that they have to accept it and use it in the process of any attempt to deny it. The foregoing is not a proof that the axioms of existence, consciousness, and identity are true. It is the proof that they are axioms and that they are at the base of knowledge and thus inescapable.